Hello everyone and welcome to lesson 1.3. In today's lesson we're going to talk about historiography and Chicago citations. So by the end of this lesson you should be able to do the following things. Explain the difference between three major schools of thought about history, and those are Whig historiography, Marxist historiography, and Annals historiography. You should also be able to write a proper Chicago-style footnote entry as well as a proper Chicago-style bibliography entry. All of this you should be able to do by the end of lesson 1.3. So jumping into different types of historiography, which historiography is the study of history, or basically looking at past historical events through different types of lenses, is what historiography is. So historiography is the history of history, is studying the study of history, if that makes sense. So Whig individuals, or people who identify as Whig historians, they would present the past as an inevitable progression towards ever greater liberty and enlightenment, culminating in modern forms of liberal democracy and constitutional monarchy. So what they're talking about is that Whig historians look at world history, and they're talking about going from, things from ancient Egypt and ancient Rome and ancient China, and even in the ancient Aztecs and in the African kingdoms. All of that, we are moving forward into ever progressing forms of constitutional monarchy and democracy. So if you think about democracy has spread from uh, different parts of Europe into Asia and Africa and the Americas. Whig historians believe that that's just how historians are. They stress the works of great men. They often talk about uh, great world leaders. Sometimes those could be women, things like Queen Elizabeth I. She was the Virgin Queen, and she helped usher in the early ages of the British Empire. But it's the works of great men mostly, and great people. It's the rise of the constitutional movement, gaining greater personal freedoms, and ever increasing scientific progress. So, advances made in medicine and scientific research, all of that type of stuff is Whig historiography. The term is often applied to histories that present the past as inevitable marches of progress towards enlightenment. That's really what Whig historians believe. History is just a natural progression of events that happen one after another that just make us more and more liberal minded, and more closer to democracy, and more enlightened. So, a different vantage point in studying history is the vantage point of Marxist historiography. And so, yes, this is based upon the teachings of Karl Marx. And so, this is him right here, Karl Marx. So, Marxist or historical materialist historiography is, as another term is known, but we'll call it Marxist historiography, is a school of historiography influenced by Marxism, and the chief aspects of it are the centrality of social class and economic constraints in determining historical outcomes. Let me put that into regular English. What Marxist historiographers believe is that history is a series of evolving economic issues, and especially when it revolves around economic class. Okay, so Marxist historians believe that history is an ever evolving series of events that happen between the struggles between the different classes of society, between the haves and the have nots, if you will. So Marxist historiography has made contributions to history of the working class, oppressed people, and providing us with different methodologies. Don't worry about this from below. That's a typo there. But Marxist historiography has made contributions to us learning more about the working class. So we know about the history of the working class. So we know about the labor movement and things like that. We know about a history of oppressed individuals. So it's not just, we never learned about the poor. And as a result of that, we've started branching out and learning about, well, let's look at different oppressed people. So we're looking at different subsets of society, like history of the LGBT, the LGBTQ, the history of Middle East and North African Americans, etc., etc., etc. And so the aim of Marxist history is to bring those oppressed stories to self-consciousness, and to arm them with tactics and strategies from history, which is both historical and a liberation project. What this means is that when you give voice to the oppressed people, then you liberate Their story is what they're talking about. So it's a form of liberation. So if you give light and give value and voice to the stories that are often not listened to and not heard, then it liberates them and frees them so that their voices are now heard among all the other voices that have always been heard. So the last school of historiography we want to talk about is the Annals historiography. So that's how you pronounce it, is Annals. And so the Annals school promotes a new form of history. So this is probably the most recent form of historiography that many historians are really looking at and digesting. And so it replaces the study of great world leaders with just the lives of ordinary people. So Annals is kind of like a direct opposite to Whig, if that helps. So annalist history is kind of like the direct opposite of Whigs. So remember, the Whigs were talking about the history of great men and great powers and things like that. The annalist history is like, no, history is not made by great men. History is made by ordinary people. Right there, ordinary people. Because, the ordinary people are the ones that are going to work. They're the ones that are going to fight in wars. President Biden doesn't go and fight in wars, no. So American presidents, monarchs do not fight in wars. The average people do. So history is made by the average ordinary person. So it replaces the examination of politics, diplomacy, and wars, as opposed to, let's look at climate. Climate change is something that's going to impact everybody, including great men and women and other people. Population trends, where are people moving? Are they moving north, south? Where are all the jobs going? Because where the people move, that's where the jobs go. Agriculture and commerce, are we producing more food? Are we producing less food? Are we doing trade well? Are we doing trade barriers? Technology and transportation, how fast can information and technology move between and among people and among countries? Communication, are we open communication? Are we closing communication? Are we using factual information? Social groups, how are different subsets of the population responding to each other and reacting and interacting with each other? So analyst history is looking at everything. It is a total history, if you will, and it makes more than just wars and politics. So history is not just wars and politics, who won this battle, who won this election. It is a collection of everybody's story, poor, rich, working class, upper class, climate, population, etc., etc., etc. So let's take a moment here to do a skill practice, and I want you to pause the video and read this particular paragraph, and we're going to look at the story of Billy and find out different vantage points on how different historical schools of historiography would look at this story. So pause the video and read this story, and we'll go from there. So poor Billy Elliot is really having a bad time of it, or should we say had a bad time of it, ha ha ha. But the question is, which description accurately describes how each type of historian would view the events in the story of Billy Elliot? So first one, let's take a look at it. Death by determinism. So Billy was the victim of an inevitable chain of circumstances traceable back to climate and geography. So would this be a Whig, Marxist, or Annals response? So in terms of the things that we would look at, are climate and geography are two key things that I would look at to determine this. And so the only ones I know that do that are annals historians. So annals historiography, a historian would look at this story and say, well, poor Billy Elliot is just a poor victim of an inevitable chain of circumstances traceable back to climate and geography. And just to give you some examples of this where these historians would find this, for example, he had a fling because the summer heat had made him a little discombobulated, and the hot summer weather had buckled the road, which made the steamroller have to be there. So he's a poor victim of things like climate and geography. So the second one, death by free will. This means Billy's death was a freak accident that has no meaningful cause. So what this means, though, is that this is, this whole story is just a successive stories, a series of events. It just, one thing led to another. It's not because of climate change. It's not because of things that Billy did. It just happened to be one series of events after another. So would this be Whig, Marxist, or Annals historians? And the answer to this would be Whig historians. And when you look at this, you can just literally look through a series of events. He has been unemployed since last car plant. Yeah, there's some reasons why it was, but no big deal. He actually did the fling. He then decided that he was going to do this. It doesn't matter about the government. So he grabbed his coat. His mother gave him so da 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 da. He was strolling down the road, and then he surprised and he got leapt into the road. These are just a series of events. It doesn't matter about all the backstory. It's just a series of events. So this is what a Whig historian would look at. And lastly, looking at death by dialectic materialism. Don't worry about that big bougie term. This is just what it means. It's a philosophy of science, history, and nature developed in Europe by the writings of Marx and the people who created communism. And it emphasizes the importance of real-world conditions in terms of class, labor, socioeconomic. So this is just a fancy schmancy way of saying Marxist philosophy. Okay, so Billy was a sad victim of economic forces, and of course, those are Marxists. So Marxist historians would look at that. And again, you can see the Marxist philosophy in here because he had been unemployed, because General Motors had done something to him. As a result of all of that, that's when he started to have the fling. It wasn't because he himself had done anything wrong. He was depressed about losing his job. The man has clearly cut back the unemployment, so the government is making his life a little bit worse. So there are several examples that you see in here about different economic factors that have caused these conditions to happen to his life, which has caused, unfortunately, Billy's untimely death. So now shifting focus to Chicago-style footnotes, so totally shifting completely away from historiography. So now to Chicago-style footnotes. You will need to know how to properly form both footnote and bibliography citations in Chicago manual style. Okay, so this is a requirement, and I'm going to be first to tell you I do not like this method. However, because the craft of history requires us to use the Chicago manual style, that is why we have to use it. But my personal preference is MLA. However, we must use Chicago style citations. Chicago is used by historians, and so that's, as I said, that is the approved discipline. Footnotes require a raised superscript at the end of a sentence that you will be citing. You can see an example of it right here with the little tiny 4. The number 4 indicates that this would be my 4th citation, and the page number will appear at the bottom of the page that I'm typing the sentence on. Okay, so you will see an example of the several examples throughout the activities that we'll do for this particular lesson. But Chicago-style footnotes do require a superscript at the end of the sentence you're citing. And this slide probably is going to be very helpful for many. If you notice the big information here in red, the biggest thing to know about the difference between a footnote and a bibliography. So the difference between a footnote and a bibliography is that a footnote is first name goes first, and a bibliography last name goes first. So think of it like this. In a bibliography, remember the bibliography goes at the very end of your paper, and so at the end of your paper, if I was trying to find a book or something like that, then you would put it in alphabetical order by last name. But if you're doing a footnote at the end of a page, it's just going to be the first name. So here's a bibliography example where Nichols is the last name for Margaret, and then here's a footnote. If you'll notice, Margaret's name is first. So if it helps, F for footnote, first name goes first. Footnote, first name first. And then a shortened form would be like this, and we'll give you more information as we're developing writing throughout your time in IB history, so you'll learn more about the shortened form as we go along. So we have concluded Lesson 1.3, Historiography and Chicago Citations. So, can you explain the difference between the 3 major history schools of history? Whig historiography, Marxist historiography, and analyst historiography. Can you write a proper Chicago-style footnote, and can you write a proper Chicago-style bibliography? If you can, then pat yourself on the back. You're doing an amazing job. So at this point, you want to look for any activities for Lesson 1.3 and complete that, and then move on to Lesson 1.4. Thank you so much for your time, and have a wonderful day.